once the balls reached a certain size, the feeling of the skin was as if I was like being burned from the inside out. It was incredibly painful. And then they would grow and spread and spread and spread. And eventually the skin would get so hot and so thin that it would finally break and pus and flesh.
This is Med Spa Mayhem, the podcast all about the chaotic world of medical aesthetics. From Botox to lasers to IV bars, learn how to tell real versus fake, legal versus illegal, and safe versus potentially deadly. Hear the crazy stories inside the med spa world and find out what questions to ask and how to spot the people cutting corners. I'm your host, Dr. Kate D. Together, we explore the wild west of medicine that is the aesthetics industry. Today, Bia Amma tells her near-death experience with an illegal med spa in California. A woman with no license of any kind illegally injected her with a tainted substance that sent her to the hospital for over 3 months. And that woman is still out there practicing medicine without a license. Bia is now an influencer trying to raise awareness of the dangers of the dark side of the industry. And towards the end of our interview, turns the tables and asks me a few questions. Hi, this is Dr. Kate D, and I am back today with Bia Amma to talk about her experience at a unlicensed medical spa in California. Bia, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate everything that you're doing. I love the podcast, and I'm really excited to get to share my story and also introduce you to my audience as well. I have a YouTube channel where my goal is to spread awareness on issues like this, and I know that you're going to help impact a lot of people today.
Yeah, so for our listeners, Bia is a influencer and up-and-coming advocate for basically patients' rights in the aesthetic space, right? For your listeners, I'm Dr. Kate D. I am a physician who has been doing aesthetic medicine for about 10 years. I have MediSpa in Seattle, Washington. And before that, I was a breast cancer doctor. And if you want to know all about me, it's all on my website, drkated.com. And I am also on a mission to raise awareness about what's going on in medical aesthetics and to make sure that people know all the questions they need to ask to be safe and get really good treatments and not be another victim. I was hoping that you could start by telling your story and what happened to you. You're 27 now, right? You just turned 27. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
So this was all when you were 23, right? So Can you tell our listeners exactly what happened?
So I'm 27 now. This happened when I was 23 years old in the year of 2021. I was new to Los Angeles. I was working long hours at a new job that was a sales job. It was long hours, and I just didn't feel like myself. I was having some like stomach problems, bloating. I felt tired all the time, and I had previously done B12 whenever I lived in Dallas. And then one day I wake up and I see this notification on my Instagram that this med spa followed me. And I go on their nice aesthetic Instagram page with lots of followers. And I see some really nice results, and also that they offer B12 shots. I scheduled an appointment to go in. Whenever I went in for the B12 shots, the person that was injecting me, she told me that it was a combination of B12 and deoxycholic acid, which is a fat dissolver. She also said that there were other vitamins like vitamin C for skin tightening and youthfulness. And, you know, me as a 23-year-old not knowing anything, and of course just ignorantly thinking that these places are better regulated, and that I had no idea that there was people out here, you know, illegally practicing medicine so easily. I trusted everything she said. And I thought it was all totally legit and it looked legit. And it was in a gorgeous Salon Republics building in Burbank. And then I laid down on the table and she basically starts injecting away throughout my arms and my stomach and my back. Prior, whenever I got B12 shots, I was only injected in my arm, but she told me, she was like, well, the more places we inject you, the better it's going to work. And so I just trusted her and I said, okay. And I lay down on the table and I kind of closed my eyes and I think I even fell asleep for a point in time. It was, pretty not painful. And well,
so the shots themselves were not painful because for our listeners, deoxycholic acid is the same thing as Kybella. Presumably it was a generic because she didn't call it Kybella. Kybella is actually quite expensive. But when you inject Kybella, it's actually quite painful normally.
Yeah. Well, to this day, we have no idea what they actually injected into me. We have no idea if it was actually truly deoxycholic acid or not. Later on in the story, we find out that what she actually injected me with was ordered from Alibaba. And yeah, so
she injected you multiple spots all over your body. How many injections were there total? Do you know?
Quite a few throughout my arms, my triceps, the fattier area of the arms, the fattier area of the stomach, and then probably like 6 on each side in my backside. But the way that the injections turned out, I think it seemed like she injected me more than she actually did. I'm really not sure, but I mean, probably like 100 injections.
Okay.
Or more.
That's a lot. So
Yeah.
all over
No,
your body, basically.
she just went crazy. She just injected me everywhere and I didn't think twice.
And they didn't sting at all and they didn't swell up right away?
So they did swell up right away.
Okay.
Yeah.
So typically with deoxycholic injections, they sting a lot. It's an acid and it's very painful, and it swells up right away typically. But go ahead, go on with your story.
Yeah. So of course I didn't know that. And also just to let you know, when I arrived to Los Angeles, of course saw a lot of influencers and models and actors and stuff like that. And tons of girls had their lips done and Botox and all these things. And so I was also reaching a point in my influencer career where I was like, okay, I think I need to start getting stuff done too. And so 10 days prior to scheduling these B12 shots, I had actually scheduled to get my lips done. And it's just so funny, the events and the story, because I remember the injector that I had gotten my lips done with was raving about Kybella in my session with her. And she was like, oh, I love Kybella. I'll be at home sometimes and I'll just inject it into my stomach myself. It's like, it's so addicting because, if you have some fat, you'll just inject it over here. And she was just raving about Kybella. And so mind you, that happened just 10 days before scheduling these B12 shots. And so whenever the girl...
Same place?
No. I got my lips done in Dallas. And whenever I had flown back I was visiting Dallas for a couple of days and decided I wanted to get my lips done there with a girl that I was familiar with. Someone else had gotten their lips done with her as well. I also was not very happy with her work. Looking back, I know that it wasn't good work. But in the moment, I thought that they looked good, I guess. And so anyways, yeah, so she was raving about Kybella in our session together. And so whenever I go to this spa to get the B12 shots, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like this is such a nice coincidence. This is so awesome that I'm also going to be getting Kybella and B12 injected into me. And well, I left that night thinking that everything was going to be fine. She told me to take some arnica and to not shower that night. And I didn't. And I went to bed. And I went to work the next morning thinking that everything was going to be okay. And I remember around 3:00 the next day, I started to get like this really bad brain fog. Like I just felt super woozy and I just kind of felt like this cloud came over my eyes. I just didn't feel right and I couldn't put my finger on it and I didn't really know what was happening. And then I had a date that night that I had been pushing off and I was like, I can't cancel on this guy again. And so I go on this date. and I'm all the way in downtown Los Angeles, which is like an hour away from Calabasas, which is where I lived. And all of a sudden, I feel like I'm going to pass out. I start feeling terrible. I can feel my body creating a fever. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I have to go home. Like, I feel like I'm getting really sick here. And I thought it was maybe just like an immune response to getting the injections. I thought like maybe I was just low immunity and I got a fever, or it was a cold, or, just something simple, and I just needed to like sleep it off. So I'm struggling to drive home on the highway while feeling like I'm going to pass out, and I start to shiver and tremble really badly. I have no idea to this day like how I was able to make it home all that way feeling the way that I was feeling. It was a very scary drive for me. When I finally got back to my studio, I remember I turned the heater on, I wrapped up in blankets, I took Tylenol, and I was just trying to, reduce my fever. Things got so bad after that, and things progressed alarmingly fast. So basically, I was able to reduce the fever. Some days I would have a fever, some days I wouldn't. But day by day, what ended up happening is under my skin where I was injected, these small nodules began to appear, and the nodules would grow to about a Skittle sized ball. They were very painful. They would swell, and then came the heat. Once the balls reached a certain size, the feeling of the skin was as if I was like being burned from the inside out. It was incredibly painful. And then they would grow and spread and spread and spread. And eventually the skin would get so hot and so thin that it would finally break and pus and flesh.
So you got basically abscesses all over your body, and it would burst through your skin.
Yeah.
100 of them.
Hundreds. I had open fleshed all throughout my upper body. When I was actually in the hospital, I had anywhere from 2 to 4 wound care nurses, and it took hours to do my wound care.
How did you get to the hospital? What happened?
Yeah. So then we kind of reached the point in the story of like, oh my God, something serious is going on here. What do we do? Where do we go? I go to the ER and I'm like, hey, I went and got these shots done. Is this necrosis? Like, because necrosis is the only thing I ever, have heard of before.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, hey, is this necrosis? Like, what's going on? And they're like, no, it's not necrosis. It's an allergic reaction. You're going to have to see a dermatologist. They sent me home. They like looked at me for 3 seconds and sent me home, an ER at a hospital. So I schedule an appointment for a dermatologist, and the dermatologist looks at me and he was like, I have no idea if this is an allergic reaction or if this is an infection. There's no way to tell right now. He does several punch biopsies on me and then sends those out to pathology. Unfortunately, with mycobacterium, rarely do doctors know to test for it. And it's such a specific and difficult thing to test for. A lot of the times in the beginning, you even get false negatives. And so we were waiting for results. Nothing comes back positive, of course. And he's like, okay, I don't know whether I should give you doxycycline or if I should give you steroids. He chose steroids.
Oh, boy.
And that's where things got really bad. So things were already really
you had in the end, that was the opposite of something that was going to help, because that's going to help the mycobacterium grow crazy.
Yes. And that's exactly what happens. Things were extremely painful. I was having, my fevers daily. At this point, a coworker had taken me into her home to live with her. And that's at the same time that I was prescribed the steroids. So I'm taking the steroids, which are suppressing every other symptom that I'm having, the fevers, the pain, and I'm starting to feel like, oh my God, this is working. This is like, I'm going to be fine in 2 weeks, like not a big deal. And then on the backside, the bacteria is growing rampant, and these flesh wounds on my skin are actually just getting extremely bad, like by the day. It seemed like every day there was a new wound. And at this point, I had to have help getting out of bed. I couldn't put clothing on by myself. I couldn't shower by myself. I had to have assistants going to the toilet. I really couldn't do anything by myself. And then in the interim of this time period, my dermatologist was like, well, I need you to go to UCLA Hospital and they're going to be able to do more advanced testing. So we go to UCLA Hospital, we do more advanced testing. The derm team there is smart enough to test for mycobacterium. And we were lucky enough to get a pathology result within like 2 weeks, which for mycobacterium is still super early to get a positive because it can really take some time to find a positive. The second we found out that it was mycobacterium, I couldn't wait any longer. The same day that I received the phone call was a Friday, was the same day that I ended up going to the hospital because I thought I was going to die that night. I had no idea what mycobacterium was. And I remember getting that phone call and the doctor calling me like, oh, you have mycobacterium. I'm like, oh, microbacteria. That doesn't sound serious at all. And so I'm like, oh, okay, I'm gonna be good, in like a month or whatever. It's not something serious. And then that night I felt basically I think I was going into like a septic shock. It was so much that it was like I was tapering down from the steroids because they told me they're like, come off the steroids now.
Mm-hmm.
So the tapering off the steroids was really painful. As you know, it's not an easy thing to do, especially whenever you have an infection like that. And then all the real symptoms and feelings are hitting me. And so my fever is like a 104. I feel like my heart is racing. And I was just laying there at night, like, and praying to God, like, please, like, I have no idea what to do. And I just hear this voice saying, it's time to go to the hospital. And I felt like if I didn't go to the hospital that night, I was going to die. And so I woke up my coworker, the one that was taking care of me, and I said, I have to go to the hospital now. And I was admitted, and that was late May, and I didn't get out of the hospital. I was in hospital care until September 1st. And so in the hospital is where they were able to give me morphine, painkillers. They were able to reduce my fever. They gave me oxygen because it was really difficult breathing that first day. And then I was just kind of like disabled and asleep for most of my time in the hospital. I slept like 20 hours a day. The nurses would come in and I was kind of like a rag doll. They would plug up my medicine. They would, clean my wounds for me. And I was just kind of like, I was in excruciating pain, but I was also like in a state to where I can barely remember these things. You know what I'm saying? It was just, it was.
And mycobacterium can be very difficult to treat. So did they have to treat you with multiple antibiotics to get rid of it?
Yeah. So there was a lot of complications in the hospital. One was the doctors trying to, I guess, get through to a young girl, like the severity of the situation, and that I was going to be on antibiotics for at least, 6 to 9 months. So they thought. Unfortunately, I think there was so much mycobacterium that was injected into my body. No one knew what was going to end up happening. And I had a very young and inexperienced infectious disease doctor on my case originally, and she put me only on 3 antibiotics. So while I was in the hospital, I was actually getting worse because the antibiotics weren't doing anything. They were IV antibiotics, obviously, through the port. So she put me only on 3, and then they consulted with...
would be a lot for your multi-drug resistant mycobacterium. It wasn't enough.
Yes, exactly. So when I actually had the director of infectious disease step in on my case because I was not improving, I went up to 8 antibiotics. And so, yeah, I was on 8 different antibiotics, including amikacin, which was incredibly difficult, tigacycline, worst medication in the world. I mean, being on tigacycline and amikacin, you have the extreme vomiting constantly, which you already get from the other medications, but tigacycline is just another level of hell. And then amikacin was so painful on my ears. I think I just have, a susceptibility to the side effects of hearing loss for amikacin. And I was losing my hearing at such a fast rate that we had an audiologist on my team who would measure my hearing every single week. And every single week we would just see it drop. I have permanent tinnitus for the rest of my life. I've lost 30% hearing in my right ear. And I remember it just felt like my ears were bleeding sometimes. Like I would hate how noisy the hospital was. I would just like, can you please turn the beeping on the machines off? Can you just talk at a lower voice? I mean, they would come in the room sometimes and just be so loud. And I remember holding my ears because I was in so much pain from the amikacin, and they had to pull me off the amikacin a lot sooner than they would have liked to. But amikacin is the medicine that really got us the most headway in them
against
beating the myco. Yeah.
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 So So you got out of the hospital finally in September, and I know that it's been a long slog ever since then, and
Mhm.
you not completely, even now, years later, not completely eradicated all the mycobacterium from your body. For people listening, we don't see mycobacterium infections all that often. Tuberculosis is also a mycobacterium, a different one. And then there's a few other kinds we just don't see all that often in the United States. And they can wall themselves off basically in your body. So you can have sort of this smoldering, walled off area of it where sometimes you just can't, the antibiotics
Penetrate.
can't get in there. And so you have to like surgically excise that little nodule sometimes to get rid of it. But if you've been injected over 100 sites in your body, that's obviously going to be challenging, right? Especially
Yeah.
if they kind of spread. It sounds like they spread a bit. Each one kind of spread into multiple nodules. So
Yeah.
total nightmare. I just so sorry that this happened to you. Can you describe, the what you have residual, like the scarring or what it looks like?
Yeah. People now kind of say that my scars look like leopard or like cheetah marks all throughout my body, or like a Dalmatian. But I have some interesting channels. Like I have like a 9 centimeter long scar here for a channel that was created. And then I have surgery. I have different looking scars from surgeries, of course, from like removing a lot of the tissue. It's not a pretty sight. My skin is alarming to any person that looks at it. And it sucks. I mean, the hardest thing for me was looking at my own flesh, eat itself alive essentially, and then kind of looking at that every day and wondering like, how am I ever going to come back from this? And what is it going to look like? I had no idea. And it took a total of 9 months for my wounds to even heal in the first place, but really 11 months total because of a surgery that I had at the 9-month mark. And so
Mhm.
I was dealing with open wound holes until 11 months in. And then, of course, the 6 hours of daily IV antibiotic infusions for 2.5 years. And even, so whenever I came off of antibiotics in late 2022 to go on oral only antibiotics in January of 2023, what ended up happening was a very short remission, 6 months or less, and the mycobacterium had started respawning.
Going again. Oh,
Yeah.
God. So, if it's okay with you, I'd really like to explore exactly who this person was and how this happened, because I think that that's really critical to understand for everybody at home. Avoid people like this, okay?
Yeah.
Because this particular person is still out there,
Yeah.
and I don't honestly know how that's possible. So let me just, from the medical side, let me just break this down to like talk about just exactly what went wrong, because there were so many things here. For everyone listening, I actually met via, well, we haven't met in person, but over the phone, we connected because back in January, a reporter reported on your case, and I didn't actually see that report, but she was interviewed on NPR, and I heard this report on NPR, and it described this, and it was just sort of a general warning about med spas. And I'm like, wait a minute. I was so infuriated by what happened. And I was like, well, why is there no, discussion of how incredibly bizarre this was? Like, I knew from just listening to that episode of NPR that the person who touched you didn't know anything about medicine, because what they did was insane.
Yeah.
Even if it had been real Kybella, it was insane. But the fact that it spread clearly contaminated with mycobacterium, the fact that they, took illegally imported, fake product that was tainted with bacteria and they put that all over your body, that's, even more insane. But
Essentially, what happened is while I was in the hospital, California Department of Public Health and Safety has a doctor that works within the hospital. He opens up an investigation on my behalf while I was in the hospital. Again, I had nobody to advocate for me. I hardly knew anybody in Los Angeles. I never had a single doctor saying, "Did you call the police, or were these people medical professionals?" There was never any kind of discussion on that part, and I thought things were being taken care of by California Department of Public Health and Safety. Then in around September of that year, California Department of Public Health and Safety calls me to tell me that they're starting in on the investigation. And so there's two parts of the investigation. They have to come to my studio and test the water in my studio. And they called the landlord ahead of time. Obviously, I wasn't living there anymore. I moved in with family, but they called the landlord ahead of time to go test the water in the studio that I was living in. And then, of course, they called the salon studio for them to go and schedule an appointment when no other consumers were there, and of course do testing and investigation in their office. Well, what ended up happening is when the California Department of Public Health and Safety investigators arrived there was nothing. They had completely gotten rid of everything, all materials, vials, anything that would prove that they're running basically an invasive clinic. So after that, they ended up moving into another building. They had several locations at that point in time, and I believe now they only have one or two locations. But I know that they have tried rebranding and operating under other names and other people. So it's really difficult to kind of keep track of them because they've been hopping around so much and because they've moved around. But the one who is really trying to continue doing what she's doing, I mean, she does hyaluron lip filler. She's still offering the fat dissolving shots. She does the lipocavitation. And on Google, it says that they're permanently closed because the California Department of Public Health and Safety, they send this. It doesn't even enforce them to close, but they send this like kind of like cease to practice, or like you need to stop, doing any
desist letter.
Yeah, but nothing happened. They continued on. No one's keeping track of them to make sure that they're not offering these services. And so again, they keep getting away with it because they keep hopping around. And so, that's basically what happened. Even though it says that they are closed on Google, they're still active and acquiring clients through social media and through word of mouth. And there's been absolutely no consequences for the business owners. And it's really interesting because even in the lawsuit now, they're trying to say that it's my fault because I had a pre-existing autoimmune condition, which I didn't. They're trying to basically pull any excuse as to why this was my body's reaction, which doesn't even make sense because I was injected with lethal amounts of mycobacterium.
Yeah. So the things that are very clear medically from this point of this story is that, first of all, this person knew nothing about medicine, doesn't know anything about nursing, is completely unlicensed, and is practicing medicine illegally without a license. That is a felony in all states. So even if she didn't cause you any harm, it's still a felony. And then to inject you the way she did, so what she did makes no medical sense. So first of all, Kybella is a bile acid that has been FDA approved to treat one thing only, and that is fat under the chin, submental fat. And there were studies that were done. I was all excited about Kybella when it first came out. We got trained on how to do it. I did it for a couple years in the submental area, and it really doesn't work very well. So first of all, it's very painful when it goes in. It causes a lot of swelling. The swelling lasts for about 2 weeks, and then it has middling results as far as dissolving fat. Sometimes it works better than others, but the big thing about under the chin is that even if you successfully treat the fat, the skin tends to hang right where it hung before. So even if you've got no fat left there, it kind of looks the same. Excuse me. I dropped Kybella years ago, and most doctors have.
Yeah.
And the idea of using it all over the body, it's very, very dangerous. Why? Because it dissolves fat. Well, besides the fat that we kind of don't like, none of us really do, the every nerve in your body is coated with myelin, which is fat. It's a fat coating. It's like the coating of any wire. If you go into the back of your stereo and you've got electrical wires, if anybody has stereos anymore, that'll date me. But it insulates your nerves, and Kybella can completely dissolve your myelin. And so it will really, not only is that extremely painful, but it may not go back. So you can get permanent numbness or paralysis of a nerve.
Wow.
So doctors will not be just throwing that around willy-nilly, and certainly won't be injecting that all over anybody's body. And the reason I asked about burning is because Kybella burns. So like the idea that she injected you 100 times with actual Kybella, like I have a hard time believing that's what it was.
Yeah.
But that would have really been painful, and you wouldn't have been able to sleep through that. So that's why I don't really think it could have been. Meanwhile, there is no way you would have a mycobacterium infection all over your body unless it was in that vial that was injected. There's not a way.
Yeah.
That's medically ridiculous. That's a
Yeah.
ridiculous scenario. In order for that mycobacterium to be seeded all over your body, it had to have been in the syringe, in the stuff they were injecting. So
Yeah.
the two things I take away from your story is, one, probably wasn't Kybella. Two, had to have been contaminated with mycobacterium. There's no way the water in your unit of your apartment, because maybe one site could have been, if it was the water and you took a shower, maybe one site could have been seeded, but not all of them. That makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
So this person did this to you knowing that they were injecting something that they illegally purchased. They also knew they were illegally practicing medicine, and they caused you to almost die. You
Yeah.
spent over 3 months in the hospital. That is assault, which I think is also a felony. Not that I'm a
Yeah.
lawyer. Okay. So as far as I know, that's two felonies, plus the illegal purchase of any kind of medication from abroad. Even if it were real Kybella and they purchased that from Europe, that's illegal too.
Yeah.
But clearly it wasn't. I really have a hard time believing that this person has not been thrown in jail over what happened to you.
I mean, you would think too, like with the amount of media coverage as I've gotten and the people that I've been in touch with and legislators and people that are I guess, playmakers and in helping me, no one has had success. The California Department of Public Health and Safety has put complaints with the medical board, the Board of Cosmetology. They've notified people. I mean, I've been on countless news networks at this point, and it's like, how come there hasn't been an arrest? Obviously, like I was in the hospital and I had no idea to fill out a police report.
Right.
I wasn't told to do that. My lawyers also thought in the beginning that this was going to be some like big money case because we didn't know that they were practicing medicine illegally until after so much discovery had been done that we find out that they're completely fraudulent and uninsured. And so the second we find out that they're uninsured, my lawyers lose all interest because there's no money in it for them. And at that point, it was, never once were my lawyers like, okay, you're going to have to file criminal charges or of course I asked about it and they're like, okay, well, you'll have to contact the attorney general, which obviously has already been done by multiple people. And I've never received a response.
Yeah. And I want to echo one point that you just made that I've made on some previous podcast episodes. And that is when the person who does this to you is not only illegal, but has no insurance. Because if you're not a doctor, you don't have malpractice insurance.
Yeah.
And this is actually true of RNs as well. So if there's an RN practicing without a medical director, that is also practicing medicine without a license, and they don't have malpractice insurance either. But
Right.
the bottom line is, if the person has no insurance, then you have no recourse, and that if something does really happen to you, there is no insurance to cover that. And if the lawyers think there's no payoff, they won't take the case.
Yeah.
So
that's exactly what I've been going through. And there's two things that I want to touch on there. So, you can walk into any salon suites, any commercial building where they have different offices or suites where a hairstylist, a tattoo artist, whoever can rent out these spots, right? And the amount of RNs or nurse practitioners that are practicing aesthetics or even just estheticians that are practicing aesthetics out of those rooms that they essentially just lease out is pretty shocking, knowing that there would have to be a medical director attached to their practice for them to even have malpractice insurance. And so now looking back, knowing what I know, it's like, okay, I'm seeing a lot of stories about the vascular occlusions in the face, and a lot of these people practicing and pieces of tissue dying because they're now injecting filler in the nose, and counterfeit products. Like an influencer just had to have her lips completely removed because of counterfeit Juvederm that was injected into her lips, and it's just really devastating. I mean, it's just kind of scary, and it's a thing to watch out for. What I don't want to do, and like me spreading awareness, is like screw over the good med spas, the people like you who have a good business, who are doctors, and who are operating safely. It just kind of sucks because it kind of puts this bad taste in everyone's mouth who finds out about these things. Like, how do I know what's real and not? And how do I know if this nurse actually does have malpractice insurance? I just had a girl who worked at a med spa submit an anonymous story a couple of weeks ago stating that she begged the medical director and the investor of the med spa that she worked at for proof of the malpractice insurance because of how many inappropriate things she saw go on in the spa. And she never got it. After months of working there, they would never actually show her proof that they had malpractice insurance.
Well, you'd be crazy to do this and not have it. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
just a tremendous amount of liability to not have insurance. I think the thing you just said is really why I started writing the book and why I started this podcast is how do you know what's real and what's not? I don't think that by talking about it, you're going to scare people away from the legitimate places. If anything, as long as you understand what to ask and what to look for, then you can find the really great places. There are a lot of really great places. It's
Yeah.
just, I would say that I said this to my lawyer who was on the podcast last week. I think that well over half of the growth of the industry over the last 10 years has been people doing it illegally.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, totally agree. So, so what questions do you need to ask? So, obviously the first one is, what is your credential? What's your license? Who's the medical director? Every place has to have a medical director. So there has to be a doctor in charge. And in some states, that can be a nurse practitioner. California is not one of those states.
Yeah.
So in California, you actually have to have a doctor in charge, even if it's a nurse practitioner or PA seeing you.
And that's where I want to highlight this piece and how many stories I have heard of where the medical director puts, their credentials on a med spa that a nurse or an investor operates. Happens all the
Yeah,
time.
it happens all the time. They rent somebody's medical license. And
Yeah.
why that doctor would do that, I don't really understand that. It's like quote unquote easy money, but it's not if something goes wrong. And so that's why I encourage everyone, if you're going to a new place, not only ask who's your medical director, but ask to have a consultation with the medical director.
Or if they're on site. And again, it's alarming because it's like anyone can put a white coat on and look official. I mean, the people that did this to me had a white coat on too. And, you think that even in the anonymous story submission that the girl sent me, it's like the doctor would wear scrubs and appear to be a medical professional and was nothing other than an investor.
Well, you can easily look up doctors. They're not only can you look up, from their NPI. There's a national, I think it's provider index or physician index. But the ABMS, so the American Board of Medical Specialties, has a lookup tool for every doctor, so you can see what their board specialization is, and when they became board certified, and if they've kept it up.
Yeah.
And you can look up every single doctor. And the nursing boards have the same thing. And those links are in the book. So I would 100% look these people up, and I would ask to have a consultation with the director in charge. Now, directors are not always there all day, every day. And I am the medical director in my own practice. And right now I'm in my office about 5 minutes away from my practice, but I don't have any RNs. I have 2 PAs and a nurse practitioner who work with me, but I'm always available. And we also have backup people. My partner at the other location, she is always my backup. And of course, in Washington State, we have nurse practitioner, independent practice, and so we have 2 nurse practitioners as backups as well. So we always have an expert available to be, the medical director. God forbid anything, goes wrong.
Yeah.
But I think the key thing is ask to see the medical director. And if that person is literally never there, then they're never there and they're not actually supervising anything. And I
Yeah.
would not go to that place.
Yeah.
And if you go to a place and you can see a doctor or a nurse practitioner or a PA, that is legal
Mhm.
almost everywhere, pretty much, right? And they can do the initial assessment and diagnose you and make a treatment plan. And then that treatment plan can be carried out by a nurse, and some things can be done by estheticians as well, depends on the state.
Mhm.
But you can't just go see an RN or an esthetician and get a medical procedure done. That's not legal anywhere in
Yeah.
any state.
And
Yeah,
that's the thing that's really frustrating, because I see so many girls on Instagram going to esthetician school, and now they say, "Oh, I'm taking a certification course on injections, and I'm going to be able to start injecting lips soon under the supervision of a, whatever, who lets them basically do it at the spa." And it's just like, my gosh, we have to put a stop to this. Like, it sucks. I get it that the barrier of entry to become a nurse is so high, but it's like, first off, the woman who did my procedures in botched, she works at obviously a med spa. Everything is totally legitimate, but she had to work in the ICU for like 3 years. And for many people, it's like, okay, well, if you don't have experience in the hospital, and if you don't have like true knowledge of anatomy and everything that goes on in the face, you should not be injecting. It is not as simple as putting hyaluronic acid in lips. There is so much that goes on and into the face that, I'm sorry, but if you are not a nurse and did not, go through the rite of passage to have that kind of rank, then you don't deserve to be practicing aesthetics.
And I 100% agree with you. And the thing is that when you don't know something, you don't know that you don't know it. And
Yeah.
that is what's happening across the country with, in certain states, it's more than others, where unethical people are running like weekend courses, and they will literally train anyone, and they convince these people who, by the way, those people are being ripped off too, because they're
Oh,
paying
yeah.
over many thousands of dollars. They think they're investing and learning a skill that they're going to be able to go out and do. And that place who trained them convinces them that they now have a skill, which, by the way, it takes years to learn how to do these things,
Yeah.
not a weekend. But, and they have this expectation that, oh, they can go out and practice, and they have no idea what they don't know. They don't know the science and physiology. They don't know what they're doing is completely illegal. And they end up, purchasing illegal products, setting up illegal systems, and really harming people. And I know that you've had all these reports. I know that we've talked about the lady who was killed in a med spa in Texas last summer. And then other people who've had, they've been basically disfigured by filler, had vascular occlusions.
Yeah.
So it's just very frightening. So for now, until Bia and I change the world and make this a better place and safer for everyone, definitely, if you're going to any new place, ask all those questions. And it's okay to pursue it. And there's some great treatments. And neither of us is saying that the treatments are bad, but they have to be done by qualified people who really know what they're doing and know how to practice medicine.
Yeah. And, looking back, I was just a 23-year-old girl. I had no idea about the world of cosmetology, aesthetics, anything. I mean, thank God I wasn't trying to schedule, liposuction or breast implants or something more serious, because I wouldn't have known what to look for in that situation either, which is a whole different topic, because then we get into the issues of cosmetic surgeons, which is not a thing that actually exists, and how there's no recourse for doctors practicing plastic surgery under the title of cosmetic surgeon.
Yeah,
And
actually, I have scheduled for next week an initial session with a facial plastic surgeon
that's
to
awesome.
talk exactly about that. So we will be covering
Yeah.
that in a future episode.
That's amazing. And it's going to help out a lot of people, because, as someone who has been on botched, have personally been able to see and be around people that have been botched so badly by cosmetic surgeons. And there's no board of cosmetic surgeons. Like, those surgeons aren't, I mean, there's dentists out there doing lipo. It's ridiculous.
I know.
And
It's a crazy, crazy world.
you would think, and it's like when people hear this, they're like, no way. And it's like, yeah, it literally happens. And a lot of the time people don't believe me at first whenever I start spreading this information and I say these things, and I'm like, look, I know how crazy it sounds. It's just like, the most frustrating thing is truly the people in power and the governing powers are not shedding light on this. I mean, I think that stories like mine, or like Jennifer's, the woman who died in Texas from the IV drip clinic, and I mean, I know, like right now off the top of my head, over 5 people who have died from IV drip clinics, and none of them had a medical director on site, and at least 3 of them were not actually medical professionals injecting into the vein. They were just people who were trained over the weekend how to inject a needle into a vein, and it's just so sad. And, we hear about these things on the news, and, it comes in one day and kind of loses its hype a couple days later. Same things happened to me on all the news channels that I had been on. Oh my God, that sucks. And people forget about it a couple days later, but we don't ever end up hearing about, okay, well, what happened? What's happening to Michael Gallagher and the woman who was practicing medicine under his license?
Well, we are following up with that on this podcast. And my lawyer, who was on last week, or by the time this airs, it'll be probably 2 weeks ago. He's in Texas, and he keeps getting updates on that case. We both believe that there are going to be both criminal charges and also probably a wrongful death lawsuit related to that case. And I don't know what's happening with Michael Gallagher. At the moment, Michael Gallagher got his license back. He's practicing anesthesia, but he can't supervise others. And as an anesthesiologist, that makes it very, very difficult to practice, because most anesthesiologists have to be in a hospital where they're supervising nurse anesthetists, usually like up to 5 at a time. So for him to actually be employable as an anesthesiologist, he actually might not be so much.
See, that's super valuable information, because, like, even for me as a consumer who's like interested in these things, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, I'm just an influencer, with a platform that is trying to spread information. But I mean, like, that's such a valuable piece, because a lot of us, like, we don't know about like what happens. There was another death in an IV drip place where everything was fraudulent. And again, in a situation like that, it's like, what's the recourse? I have no idea if the girl who did that and who murdered that man is actually going to prison. It's really hard.
So, you want to ask me a few questions?
Yeah. Okay. So before we wrap up everything, I honestly want to share information about your book that's coming out called Med Spa Mayhem.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you.
So tell me, like, obviously I know why you're inspired to write the book, and I can't imagine the amount of work and research that had to go into that. Do we have an official release date, and where can people find the book?
Oh, yes. Well, the official publication date is June 11th, so coming up very soon. You can pre-order it now, basically anywhere. Amazon's probably the easiest place. So if you go to Amazon and look for Med Spa Mayhem, it'll be there. I am, for anybody in the Pacific Northwest, I am having a release party on the 9th in West Seattle. You can go to my website. It's just drkated.com or medspamayhem.com. That'll get you there too. And I'll have information on that. And yeah, and then of course this podcast, Med Spa Mayhem, and that's pretty much everywhere where podcasts are listened to.
And what can our viewers expect to learn in the book?
Well, if you're really interested in Bia's story here, then probably the rest of this book will be really interesting to you as well. I tell my story really just to know why I know anything about this stuff, because I was in breast cancer for 16 years before I pivoted into aesthetics. And I just talk about how I got there and why aesthetics is so crazy. honestly, kind of explain the background of that, and then tell just a lot of crazy stories from my own experience. It's just so nutty. Like you're after a long, long line of crazy, awful, ridiculous stories. And I just had to write about it. I just couldn't believe that this stuff is just going on and nothing happens. Nothing seems to change. And although there are a lot of laws governing the practice of medicine and governing medical spas, there really has just been a lack of enforcement.
Yeah.
So it's not that there aren't laws. There are quite a lot of them, actually. And I think the problem is that not only is it different in every state, so it can be very confusing, especially if you move from one state to another, but there's just no enforcement until someone's dead.
Yeah.
And even for you, you didn't die. And so nobody's in
People
jail.
didn't, because I didn't die, people didn't take it serious. Sometimes I'm like, dang it, like, man,
So yeah, I'm pretty passionate about this, and so I just did it. A lot of people have asked me, like, well, what made you write the book? And I'm like, I can't believe people don't know. And
yeah.
I think one of the things, I had a patient recently who's a lawyer, and she came in for toxin, and she said, she'd had it before. I was like, oh, where'd you go? And she said, oh, there's this girl down the street from my office. And I'm like, a girl? Like, was it a nurse? I mean, and honestly, this is a very, very smart attorney who had no idea who injected her skin with, she didn't know what she had or who did it or what the license was. So if very, very smart, well-educated attorneys don't know what questions to ask, how's everybody else going to know?
No, it's true.
Yeah.
It's so true. Unfortunately, I mean, a lot of smart people are going to be the victims of people who are fraudulently and illegally practicing, because we assume that we are being protected and we assume that these things are enforced. And because they're not, people get away with it. And like you said, probably over half of the growth in the industry in the last 10 years has been people practicing illegally. And so that kind of leads me to my next couple of questions. On the legal side, I mean, do you think that maybe one day we could achieve some kind of federal regulation even on the cosmetics industry?
Well, it's a really interesting question, right? I think that our country overall is moving more in the direction of states' rights and individual states governing things. And we've seen that in other spheres of medicine. However, do I think that there's going to be a lot more regulation at the state level? I definitely think so. Even in Texas, which is kind of the Wild West of medical aesthetics, because of the death of Jennifer Cleveland, I think there's quite a bit of interest among some politicians there. And so I actually think that there will be more regulation at the state level and that it may very well become safer. That is my hope. And that's really why I'm talking about this stuff. That, and maybe there'll be a Netflix documentary and we'll be able to change the world because everybody will know. But
Yeah. Yeah. And okay, so here's a huge question. Let's say, for example, there's this woman who's going. She has a huge following on Instagram. She injects people's lips with a hyaluron pen. I showed you her page, and let's
it's
say,
illegal, by the way. That is not legal. Okay.
Yeah. But again, what do you do? Do you call the police? Do you file a complaint? I mean, like, when people come across these illegal practices, what is the right steps for us to take? And do we even know the answer?
Yeah. Well, so I asked that question of my lawyer a couple weeks ago. So different states are different, but here are the places to send the complaint or fill out the complaint form. So first of all, the medical board. Every state has a medical board, and that governs doctors' licenses and PA licenses because doctors and PAs practice medicine. They also, in many states, care about people practicing medicine illegally. So if you report an illegal person to the medical board can send a cease and desist to them. The next is the nursing board. Nursing boards are the same thing, but for RNs and nurse practitioners and any other person called a nurse in that state. And they also will send cease and desist or, correction letters to any nurse who's practicing outside the scope or doing something illegal.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next place is, the police. If you're assaulted, you can file a police report. And
And
that,
when you
sorry.
say assaulted, what would that include?
Well, basically, I don't have the definition of assault, but basically, when someone does something to you with the intent to, harm or maim, you know, and if you are committing a felony in doing so, this woman who touched you was committing a felony just treating you at all, even if you had been happy with the results. What she was doing was a felony. And then she knew that she was injecting, stuff that wasn't legal, and then caused harm. You almost died.
Yeah.
So, if you do something to someone without informed consent, so even as a physician, if I were to do any kind of medical procedure on you without proper informed consent, that is also assault.
Yeah.
So if you came to me for something and I did it to you, even though and didn't go through all the risks and benefits and alternatives, right? That is what informed consent is all about. That's mandatory. Um,
Okay.
so I cannot do anything to you unless you sign a consent form that says, I understand what I'm going through. And yes, I'm willing to do that. Otherwise, it's assault. Um, so you can call the police if something like that happens to you, and then also you can file a complaint with the attorney general. So uh, the attorney general, a lot of times they have certain focus. That's a political position,
Yeah.
and a lot of them will have a different focus of what they're passionate about. Consumer affairs is the purview of the attorney general. So consumer fraud, fraudulent activity, all of that. So this would be under their purview, and I would, file a complaint there. And certainly the medical board
Yeah.
is, for if somebody actually has a license also.
Yeah. And I wonder, because I mean, I never got any follow up, nor from the California Department of Public Health and Safety about the complaints that were made on my behalf whenever I was in the hospital. I never received any follow up. And in my specific case, I'm still kind of confused on what next steps and what direction to take. And I know that's something that I'm going to have to figure out on my own. But I would say, if there's anyone who's listening that is going through something similar, or, if they believe that they went to med spa illegally, I mean, I would say my biggest regret in this situation is not filing a police report. And I would highly look into that. Like it doesn't hurt, right?
Yeah.
If something is stolen, whether it's something minor in your bag and your wallet wasn't in it, regardless, just
Yep.
file a police report, have that police report there. Because, when this first happened to me, I thought it was going to be a minor breakout for 2 weeks and I was going to be fine. I never thought that something like this could happen out of it. And I just think the safest thing that you can probably do is just have that for your records. And maybe that's me projecting based off of my own experience, but I really wish I would have done that.
Well, look, you were in the hospital for months.
Yeah.
The last thing you're thinking about when you're finally getting out of the hospital is going
Yeah.
back and filing a police report at that time. Especially,
Yeah.
you're 23 years old. You really had no way to know what the
Yeah.
right thing was
Yeah.
to do.
I mean, it's amazing how much I have learned and how much so many people have learned about the corruption of the industry through, stories like mine. And so I just have to say thank you for doing what you're doing and for spreading your awareness and your knowledge and for writing your book and also for taking the time to care about my story. I mean, you got the viewers don't know this, but you've spent a lot of time on the phone with me helping properly guide me in the right direction. And it's just really important that not only we share what people need to be doing prior to their appointments, but if something does go left, that they also understand the best steps to take so that they don't end up in a spot like I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just been quite an incredible story.
Yeah. So next steps, just for people who are probably curious on if and when I will ever get justice. I mean, most likely not. Obviously, there's nothing to collect on in the case. The statute has already ran out. Also, if I were to try to still pursue them criminally, and I have a court date with them at the end of May. To see if they'll settle, which again, I have a medical lien of $1 million just for my first year of medical treatments. And so, which that means that even if they did have malpractice insurance, and even if I did have a judge grant me a judgment of $4 million, the medical lien takes first dibs on any money won. And so out of that $4 million, the $1 million medical lien would go to, Cigna Health Insurance. Then after that, the lawyers would take their 30%. And then after that, I would be left with whatever is left over. And that's how lawsuits work in those cases. Unfortunately, though, because they were uninsured and they have no assets in their name, there's nothing to come after. There's a clause even in California that exists called a lis pendens, where you can put it on a person's house. Unfortunately, the loophole there is that they can sell the home before the lis pendens goes through. And they don't even own a house. So I'm going to be essentially left with my thousands and thousands of dollars of out-of-pocket medical debt that I have to pay and continue paying because I'm still not cured. I probably have a year or two left of fighting this. And then on top of that, the consequences of living with screwed up skin for the rest of my life. I mean, I will always have a body full of scars, and it's really difficult. It's difficult being young. It's difficult for how it's changed my health. It's difficult for how it's changed my quality of life. I was a really successful young girl before this happened to me. And, I'm thankful that I haven't given up completely on my dreams. But, there's a lot of days where it's like just difficult living in my body and accepting the fact that all of this happened just for one stupid mistake. And if I could take it back, of course I would. No one wants to go through something like that. And I just wish I would have been more careful. So I would share that message, because if there's any young girls that are listening, or mothers of young girls who are thinking about going and doing something, I would highly recommend look into things really deeply, and just make sure that something like this doesn't happen to you if you can control that at all.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice. I mean, take a pause and don't go forward without doing a whole lot of research first.
Yeah. And I know it can get exciting because you're sitting in that chair and they're like, oh, well, we have a deal today, $50 off Dysport. And you're like, oh my gosh, $8 a unit or whatever. And you get excited and you think I should dive right in. Those are sales tactics.
Yeah.
I was upsold too. I was only supposed to get it in my arms. And she was like,
I mean, that's like one shot, you're done.
yeah,
B12 is not crazy at all. B12 can really help people.
I loved B12 when I had it done correctly the first time. I thought it was great.
Yeah.
So anyways,
Well,
that's my closing statement. I just wanted to include that information out there and yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Bia. It's really been a pleasure talking with you today. And we should come back here and update people as things happen.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kate. I really appreciate everything that you're doing. And thanks for hopping on and also making this happen for my YouTube. They're going to really appreciate this.
You're so welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Bye.
If you have a question or a crazy story of your own that you'd like to hear on Med Spa Mayhem, contact us through our website, medspamayhem.com, or check out our contact info in the show notes. If you learned something and like what we're doing, please tell your friends and give us a 5-star rating in your podcast app. And read the book. Med Spa Mayhem is coming out on June 11th, 2024. Pre-order now on Amazon. You can find the link to pre-order and a link to our website in the show notes. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us today to hear this harrowing story. You can find Bia on YouTube on Beyond Skin Deep with Bia. Please share her story and this podcast with your friends. You can find links and more in the show notes. This has been Med Spa Mayhem with Dr. Kate D. We are so grateful you're listening, and we hope you've learned at least one fun or possibly disturbing fact today. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. Oh, and read the book. Med Spa Mayhem comes out June 11th, 2024, available everywhere books are sold. You can pre-order now on Amazon. Links and more can be found in the show notes and on medspamayhem.com.